Welcome to Between Shelves,
where we make connections between literature, theology, philosophy, psychology, and culture.
Join us as we explore the interconnectedness of race, spirituality, psychology, and meta-modernism.
Each episode invites you into a thought-provoking journey, unpacking how these elements shape our understanding of the world and ourselves.
My name is Aaron Waldron. We're a religiously traumatized theopoet and a shaman in journey. Our work focuses on creating community and between spaces for religiously traumatized millennials, navigating life beyond colonized religion.
And my name is Rafael Reyes. My work is on the importance of imagination and theopoetics in philosophy and religious pluralism.
We invite you to Between Shelves
to learn,
listen,
and become.
All right, welcome back to the next part of the dialogue. In the previous dialogue, we were talking about truth and trust in a meta-modern framework. And today we are blessed to have Dr. Catherine Keller join us for this dialogue to talk more about truth and trust, maybe even highlight some truthiness and what that means, especially what it means in a meta-modern frame of work. Raphael, did you have any initial thoughts?
Well, first of all, Catherine, I just want to thank you for being here with us. You know, I've been reading your work for a good part of my studies. Very fond of your work, such as books like On the Mystery, Cloud of the Impossible, Face of the Deep, which I have used in my class on systematic theology. And so, you know, your work has been pivotal for me. And so I just thank you for being here with us to have this conversation.
Well, thank you, Raphael. I'm glad I've done the work since you're finding it useful. Maybe I'll do a little more.
And you've been writing on other topics such as political theology of the earth, power with the book God in Power, No Matter What, on crisis and the spirit of planetary possibilities. So you've been doing a lot of work in the ecological spaces and theology. So I just want to also be able to lift that up, that this is some crucial work, especially during this time, and grateful for it. But with that, as Aaron had mentioned, we've been delving into meta-modernity, what it is, and what does it have to say in areas such as identity and racism and gender and sexuality. And one of the topics that keep coming up for us is this idea of truthfulness. What is true? And what's been fascinating about meta-modernism, and this is where you'll come in, is that it follows an approach which is relational in nature. And one of the terms I've been enjoying is we have sort of a naive intelligence. We do have intelligence. We do have this context from where we come from. But when we have to engage, it has to be in a form of naivete, like a naiveness, because we have to be in a form of inquisitiveness when we're engaging the other. And for me, that resonates so much with a lot of the work that process theology and the relational theology that you talk about works with. And so I just wanted to at least start this question. When you're understanding this question of truth and truthfulness, what is sort of that posture that we have from when we're engaging in that conversation? Yeah, I'll hold on to that. That's the question to kind of start out with.
What is the posture? The point of view, the angle of perspective?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Raphael. It's good to get into explicit communication with both of you. And I am sensing since you invited me to join into this conversation that there's some deep resonances with what you're calling meta-modernism and whatever it is I've been trying to do theologically. So it's important and fun to explore how they converge. And that could be a huge conversation, but we'll keep it concentrated. And yeah, you're asking about how a sense of truth emerges in a particular way, perhaps a peculiar way, within the perspective that's sometimes called a process philosophy, process theology, that has some significant reverb with meta-modernism that I hope we can explore. But you're picking up on especially the the relational element and how that opens up a different approach to what we call truth. And you named inquisitiveness, that to engage another is to be inquisitive, is to be curious, interested. Interest is a great word with the Latin inter esse, being between. So if you're interested, you're already beyond your own boundaries and finding yourself between who you are and who or what that other is, that you're inquisitive about. So we want to very firmly distinguish inquisitiveness from inquisition. You're not proposing a new inquisition. But it's interesting how inquisitiveness could get so deformed, isn't it? That asking questions out of interesse, out of being between, and curiosity that's relational, that wants to engage the other, that wants to learn from the other, that wants to receive something of the other into the self, that kind of inquisitiveness could get transformed into the aggression of an inquisition, where questions are interrogations, and either you have the true or the false answer, and you're in big trouble if you don't share your inquisitor's understanding of the truth. So yeah, we're in a moment in history when these distinctions are important. And it's really, I think, crucial to our being able to build the communities, the relationships, the solidarities that we need now to keep our inquisitiveness alive. So yeah, the relation, I think, to truth, something like this. It's that truth does not dissolve when it becomes relational. It's not that because we want to think about truth relationally, we become relativists, where everything is just relative, and therefore there's no real truth. No, this is a real pursuit of truth, but perhaps not of the truth in the old standard sense, as though truth is something changeless and fixed, something hard as rock, and as though some know it and some don't, and those who don't better try to learn it in a very specific way and are subject to inquisitions as to what truth they are following. I don't just mean a formal inquisition of the sort we saw in the Middle Ages in Europe. The relationality of truth is what's at stake, I think, for what you're calling meta-modernism, for what I have pursued through some constellation of eco-feminist process postmodernism. But I'm really loving the idea of the meta-modern. And now that we're talking about it, I think I'm going to be able to really incorporate it into
If I can just say one thing, I think what is intriguing about meta-modernism is trying to really reconcile two different worlds.
uh-huh.
The modern world framework, which seeks a type of enlightenment and that type of engagement, but also what we see post-modernity, which is sort of that healthy skepticism. Well, they would say they don't have a healthy skepticism, but post-modernity has sort of like that negation and subjectivity that's in there. And so there's this desire to honor this subjectivity of multivarious viewpoints, and then at the same time find some hint of objectivity.
Yes.
And enlightenment and engagement in there. And so as you're kind of pointing to that, and I love the word inquisitiveness and inquisition, you're trying to sort of really fine tune so that it's a neither nor, right? And it stays within this space where there is flourishing, movement, and dynamicity,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can maintain that inquisitive
Right.
engagement.
Right.
And I just wanted to provide a little bit of that context. You've already hidden, but to give some of that meta-modernism is trying to do. And if I can just say this one other part, and I would love for you to continue, is that in order for Meta-Modernism to do that, they've taken on certain aspects of paradox and ambiguity and being within that space to further that inquisitive journey, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And they've also taken on sort of an aesthetic playfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this engagement with a logos and a mythos, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
that allows for this truthfulness to walk.
Yeah.
And I would love to continue.
Yeah. Right. And that that playfulness in league with the profound seriousness is crucial, I think, to what we in this meta-modernism might mean by truth, because if truth becomes an elementally relational concept, that doesn't mean it's mere relativism. That means, though, that it is very tuned to other perspectives than its own. Because it is in relation, it remains aware of its own. I remain conscious and hopefully responsible for my own perspective so that I can engage your perspective. And sometimes that engagement, that inquisitiveness, is very playful, is exploratory, is just opening up possibilities for fresh perceptions that might alter my point of view, not because I want to get rid of my prior perspectives, but because I want to refresh them. So sometimes that playfulness is all about a kind of renewing of a sense of truthful connection to the world. And sometimes it's intensely serious, and the inquisitiveness can be existentially very, very deep, with a sense of high stakes about what's really going on in this relationship or in this context or in this world. So the playfulness is also connected to a seriousness that keeps what we mean by truth in play. That is, it's not just a matter of a constant shifting of perspectives, but it is trying to hold our perspectives in relation. I can just get carried away with my own perspective now and forget what you're really wanting to draw out in our conversation, right? I mean, it's a perfectly innocent temptation that we all feel, but we're very tempted easily to just get locked into our own perspectives. And then our truth shrinks and hardens a bit. It's more challenging, but also more fun to be inquisitive, in the sense that we are really interested, being between each other. And then there's a play of multiple possibilities that comes into focus. And I think what I just want to say finally on this is, well, finally for this round, is that connection, which you hinted at, of to trust, is crucial. And it's an etymological connection from the Old English with true and trud, Troy, I think, but connected to troth. So truth and trust are deeply connected in English, so that there's a sense of faithfulness at play in truth. You're being faithful, not just to some definition or to some, even just necessarily to some tradition or some dogma, though that's often part of what's meant, but perhaps you're being faithful to your relations, to your kin, to your community, to your country, to your social movement, but to your ultimate values, to your God. So there is in the concept of truth a rich sense of fidelity in play, and therefore the trust that opens up there is a kind of faith, of fidelity that's at play in truth. So we have here a potential for understanding truth very, very relationally, that I can't recognize or speak truth to you except in fidelity to you, in some kind of commitment to being honest, open, true to you in this moment, whoever you are, whatever you are, even if you're a dire enemy. If I'm going to be honorable in that relationship, even to an enemy, doesn't mean I can just have affection. That's not what love the enemy means. But it means I can operate with a depth of honesty and there's therefore a certain fidelity, even to that which might really wish I would just disappear. So truth has its rigors, has its sense of putting itself to a test. And what's always important then to remember is not just that truth is relational, that truth involves fidelity, but that fidelity of relationship does not equal certainty. Truth is not the same as certainty. I think that's crucial. Truth always has a kind of openness. Why? Because it is a fidelity. That's its original meaning, that fidelity, that Treue. German has the double meaning too. The Treue, trust, and with that root of truth, that becomes Wahrheit in German. But the loyalty, the fidelity in relation is never the same as certainty. It might involve great confidence, great trust, but it doesn't mean I have in this truth relation certainty as to what you mean, perhaps even what exactly I mean. So I have to constantly fine tune, and we lose that when we turn truth into something that's just a mere either or, that's a dogma that reduces to facts. So truth has a tremendous claim on us, and it's very different from lies, even though it's not the same as certainty. But truth embraces facts, as many facts as possible. It always continues to test them. And more than that, if it's truth, it's not mere fact. It puts its facts in perspective, right? Truth recognizes that perspectives are in play because relationships are in play.
That's
Is that making sense?
no, it's poetry. It's wonderful. As you were talking, and you did mention truth is not fact, and I'm remembering a piece in Whitehead. Fact itself is barren,
And
right? I'm throwing it way back to the barrenness itself. But interestingly enough, I'm thinking, as you were talking, you've really fleshed even what science is trying to do. And the reason why I say that, as a side note, is because I know in Augustin Bachelard's work, when he does Poetics of Space or Air and Dreams, a lot of the pieces he talks about is really saying we need to remember that science in and of itself is hypothesis. It's this dreamlike state, this enfleshed hope, that only after repetition or rhythm does it move away from that. I think that was in his Air and Dreams. There is this I want to say, like you were mentioning, this fidelity to this hope that it does come out to be true. And it really, at least for me and what I'm hearing, it really allows or humanizes that science. One of the things I've been thinking about is how technology is taking shape and how it's being used, but that it's a really human part of ourselves. And we don't have to talk about that today, but there's a truthfulness to technology and the tech and often theological thinking. But we won't go to get into that today. It'll be fascinating. So thank you. I wanted to eke out something else that you bring into youth and trust and this topic. You really incorporate negative theology in that framework of thinking. And I was wondering if you would be able to talk a little bit about that. I think in Cloud of the Impossible, you really speak in his work and some of the negative theology and how that helps with this engagement of not only truth, but our own relationality with one another when engaging truth. I think that's a fascinating part that gives it weight for us. How should we be thinking about when we dialogue with others on truth? Maybe very more particular, something I'm fascinated about when we get into sort of like this plural engagement, right? divine, understanding of the role of the person and what does it mean to be human? What are we to do in this world? That we have these plural engagements, these different understandings. How does negative or apophatic theology is what I think you call it, and how does that help us within that type of discussion?
Well, thank you. Of course, I love the question because I always feel attracted to that darkness of the apophatic mystery. And a lot of folk who I share a lot in common with find it off-putting, as though it's going to silence us, or as though it's a kind of theology that doesn't subject itself to critical questioning because it's all mystery beyond what we can know. And yeah, that's a stereotype of it, and it can function that way. Negative theology, or as you say, apophatic theology, which is a Greek for unsaying. So a theology of unsaying, a theology that says how much we cannot say. Indeed, how much of our theology we have to unsay if we're going to be honest. That is, if we actually want to claim that, speaking in terms of the Abrahamic traditions, this God we worship is actually infinite and is actually beyond our cognitive or any other kind of mastery. And all the traditions, of course, acknowledge that. But if we're going to take that mystery seriously, it really does say there are some limits to what we can know about it. And a lot of the history of a more theocratic kind of Christendom has been very uninterested in the apophatic. It wants to lay out there exactly what we can know, which doctrines are true and which aren't. And you can be subjected not just to an inquiry, but truly to an inquisition if you go against that truth. So that inquisitorial kind of Christianity is, of course, very, very ill-tuned to the mystery, to negative theology. I especially loved getting into the theology of the 15th century monk Nicholas of Cusa, who became a cardinal, since the Pope was someone he went around reading Greek comedies with when they were students together at Heidelberg. They retained a bond, and so Cusa had a lot more freedom than most theologians ever did. Developed a sense of God as the infinite complication, the complicatio, which is a kind of folded togetherness, which also unfolds, explicatio, and infolds, implicatio, as a very Trinitarian, the world into God's self. But in that infinite complication is actually the immanent world that God is also immanent within, a world, interestingly, understood as infinite by Cusa, ahead of almost anyone in the West, thinking that thought the universe is infinite. And that in that immanence in the world and the world in the divine transcendence, the understanding of divine mystery is very rich because it's an infinity that we can never know. And Cusa's constantly iterating the unknowability of the divine. And at best, we have conjectures. That's his word for it. We conjecture. It's good to hear a cardinal admitting that in our conjecturing, we're going to come closer to the truth if we acknowledge that we don't get it. We can't claim it. We can't have the truth and it's interesting because the images of then divine darkness become very prominent. I mean, that goes back century, 6th century Pseudo-Dionysius and the sense of the brilliant darkness, the luminous darkness that is the divine. And Cusa picks up on that glowing darkness. And in an age when we're trying to get away from white is good and dark is bad, I think it's an interesting theological metaphor, right? The luminous darkness as probably the best God metaphor that they felt they could come up with. And that luminous darkness, therefore, isn't just a flat opacity. It's not just that we don't know anything about God, so just don't talk about it. It's not like that, or just take it from authority. No, it's that a truth-seeking faith constantly reminds itself and is reminded of all that it does not know. And it knows the more we know, the more we know that we don't know. The more we learn, the further we go in our explorations, the more we become aware of the vastness beyond what we can perceive. That's why he had a lot of intuitions that anticipate much of modern science and quantum theory, and a sense of the relationality of all knowing. The observer already imports something into the observed. And for Kusa, that was true in the God relation, that we have to become aware of how much we're projecting, and yet some of that projection, some of that conjecture will refract elements of truth, of perhaps ultimate truth. So I love that. Excuse me, that whole tradition of the glowing darkness of negative theology, and I'm glad to see that it comes around here and there. Even Jacques Derrida, who was certainly no theist, nonetheless found that tradition interesting. He recognized some kinship to the deconstruction in the ancient and medieval heritage of negative theology. It doesn't ever, none of this negative theology doesn't for a moment give up on truth. It just gives up on thinking that it knows the truth, that it possesses the truth, that it can hammer others on the head with the truth. It keeps dissolving Inquisition back into open inquiry.
I like that. Pushes Inquisition back into, hammers it back into inquiry. I'm
A
thinking,
rhythmic.
yes. Well, that's interesting when we Meta-Modernism uses as sort of a metaphor image of pendulum swinging, or his figure 8. It's not in static or in stasis, but it's self-dynamic. Hearing you also speaking to that the truth that we understand and process is this dynamic mode of truth seeking that doesn't turn into that staticness, because if so, it becomes just noise.
Noise.
And so, an interesting piece. Aaron, I kind of wanted you to chime in because you were enamored by a certain piece of Catherine's work, and I just want to see if you can bring in your question.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Keller, for everything you've been sharing thus far. It's really been so much. I've been taking notes. Beautiful. The one thing that your work stood out to me, one of the main things that your work, the things that stand out are this haunting.
Oh,
When we were reading about this, we come from a theopoetic background. So,
yes.
this haunting really resonated with us in a way that inspired us to even think of writing. We wrote a small book about the theopoetics of slavery in America, and how we're talking about how, we're using theopoetic symbols to allude to, this kind of stealing of a people. And these people are then planted in America theopoetically. And then this plant gives off strange fruit. It bears strange fruit, and it's also playing on to the Nina Simone. She wrote a song based on a poem that was called Strange Fruit. And so all these elements coming together to help us tell this very complex, multi-layered story, right? And you were talking about earlier about truth, and it's so fascinating how, just as an example, in the biblical text, dreams, when characters have dreams, they are receiving some form of communication, and you were talking about, like, how does one speak truth? How does one share truth? How does one know truth? And it's interesting because from a theopoetic lens, right quick, because meta-modernism is based on a feeling. So if we're dreaming something, we have a feeling. Something about these feelings or feeling we know either is divine or is in our favor, is good for us, and it's hard to explain it. You wake up from this dream and you're explaining, look, I got to go do this. For example, like Noah. No one wanted to believe what Noah was saying. Noah said, I had this message from the divine, you could even say through a dream. And it told me I had to build this ark. And everyone's like, shut up, like, that's crazy, And as the years pass, he builds this ark. And then, of course, this event happens that no one thought was going to happen, and then symbolically, he was prepared because he had this feeling. that he needed to prepare. And he was given some sort of divine instruction. This, of course, is just my paraphrasing, but just to play with these symbols that really come from your ideas on haunting. Me, myself, we are haunted by what has happened in the past on many things that directly connect to today and affect us today. So if you could you elaborate more on this haunting?
No, that's a beautiful line of inquiry, Aaron. Right. Haunting should not just be left to Halloween, but it is a powerful metaphor, isn't it, for the way something that is past, truly past, that it has in some sense passed away, then returns, but not as it was, not in its full embodiment, but it hints, it reminds, or it spooks, might even demand, but that there's something from the past that has not been realized. There is something unfulfilled that was a possibility in the past and perhaps still is or must be recognized as such. So we might right now be feeling in this country, haunted by the framers of democracy and the sorts of limits to sovereign power that they saw as the very basis for this nation. The haunting by our own democratic history might be very important to recognize and not just try to exorcise the ghosts of the past. But so there's something about haunting that does suggest a kind of responsibility, doesn't it? Some kind of call from the past, a call to a kind of responsibility, an ability to respond now to something that is in danger of being lost. And that could be something very, very personal in our lives, so that some figure from our past, a dead relative, whatever, comes and haunts us in a dream and reminds us of a potentiality in ourselves that we had lost or repressed. And similarly, socially, politically, there is a way that we need to listen to some of the ghosts that might be haunting us about possibilities that have only been partially fulfilled and that need our strong responsiveness now, our responsibility now. So yeah, I think it's cool for Meta-Modernism and its theopoetics to pick up on the haunting quality of the past. And I guess poetics always has an edge of that haunting quality, doesn't it?
In this episode of Between Shelves, we embark on a thought-provoking exploration of truthiness through the lens of meta-modernism. Join us for a compelling dialogue with the renowned theologian and philosopher, Dr. Keller, as we unravel how this evolving paradigm challenges traditional notions of truth and invites a term called truthiness, a dynamic, relational, and layered understanding of truth in the 21st century. Together, we navigate the interplay between uncertainty and possibility, examining how meta-modernism reframes our perspectives on meaning, ethics, and coexistence in a complex world. From art to philosophy, culture, and spirituality, we're unpacking how truthiness in a meta-modern framework of thinking and being disrupts outdated frameworks around knowledge, truth, belonging, and self-expression, opening up new pathways for reimagining what or where is truth, or what or who can be trusted. Whether you're a seeker, a scholar, or just curious about the evolution of identity in our ever-changing world, this dialogue has something for you. Catch the latest dialogue Between Shelves, streaming now on all your favorite podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Let's explore the in-between together. And now, let's return to our dialogue with Dr. Keller as we continue exploring how truthiness and trust through the lens of meta-modernism reshapes our understanding of knowing and the ever-evolving journey of becoming in the 21st century.
the indirectness of poetry allows for shadows, even evokes spirits that are otherwise perhaps hidden, even hidden by more straightforward language and more bald truth claims. The truthfulness of poetry, theopoetics, is a haunting truthfulness, perhaps at this point. The way in which we can talk about God honestly is as a kind of haunting reality that has so much association with the past, and a very important past full of revelations as well as betrayals and disappointments. But that haunting quality of what we call God is keeping something of that past revelatory history alive, but it only haunts because it's seeking to open fresh potentialities that are connected to that past, but that don't appropriately simply sink into it and get identified with the past. Then the past just becomes this set of facts and dogmas. It loses the spirit quality of haunting. And I think it's good to sometimes remember the connection between what we call the Holy Spirit and, or Holy Ghost, and the kind of ghosts that haunt, because I think we are haunted by the holy, especially in this age in which we don't, if we're honest, have very direct communications. I mean, modernity kind of eradicated any meaningfully direct sense of the mystery. They just wanted to expel the mystery. Explain it or explain it away. So I think we want to be open to a kind of haunting by the spirit, sometimes spirit in a very plural sense, our spirits, sometimes in a very singular sense, the spirit that is perhaps pervading everything, enlivening, but haunting. And I guess theopoetics is a way of, keeping that mystery alive in language, giving it some poetry. Of course, theopoiesis has another very important meaning. The poiesis, doesn't it? You're nodding, right? But there's the reference to poetry in poiesis, but it also means doing, acting. That's really the original sense in Greek of poiesis. It's a doing. So this is not just an aesthetic poetics. This is a poetry seeking enactment.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Poiesis as a doing, an action, something that we see and act upon. And it's this idea of doing, I kind of want to continue with that a little bit in this way. I think what I've been hearing, and this has been great, is that you've been given very concrete examples of how truth plays or haunting plays within thinking about democracy or the democratic and its involvement today, or being very particular in historical figures and how they think through. And one other thing that you really hone in on is the ecological. And you have this term called apophatic entanglement with the planetary. How does that framework of thinking, and you've already done some of it because the apophatic sense, but this entanglement, which is another key component of your work, how does that inform your understanding of truth? How does that play with logical struggle that we're dealing with today?
That logic of the egos, yeah. Thank you, Raphael. That's a difficult, important question. Apophatic entanglement is a term that doesn't immediately shed light, perhaps, but I think it is pointing at something worth meditating on. First, our entanglement. I kind of lift that term from quantum entanglement, which gives us an insight into how the most elemental bits of the universe are relationships, that there is such a profound entanglement at the very basic level of things, that if apparently one micro entity is in relation to another for a moment in some measurable space, and if they're separated and one of them flies off meters away or thousands of miles away, those two will still react as though They're in immediate relation to each other. One, particle B will immediately mirror in its reverse form particle A, just as they were relating when they were right next to each other or bound to each other. That immediate responsiveness will go on at any distance whatsoever. This just stuns me year after year. I can't get over my sense of amazement at this insight of quantum entanglement. The very most elemental level of things are just one endlessly unfurling web, but where every fiber of the web seems to be in connection with everyone it's ever intersected then endlessly. And clearly, at more complicated levels of reality, there are ways in which that instant entanglement gets complicated, gets enriched, gets saturated, gets also repressed, especially I would imagine with our species as we developed our vaunted individuality, which quickly started succumbing to the deformation of individualism, the delusion that we are separate entities that then just only works as an illusion by systematically repressing our entanglement with everything in our environment. And that then means ultimately everything in our world. So I love the cosmic ecology of this notion of cosmic entanglement. And the word entanglement, has some interesting, just immediate non-technical resonance. It suggests that we're not just connected, we're really tangled up in each other, which is just our connections are always more complicated than we can control or master or know. I think that's what the entanglement, at least indirectly, signals. And so I think it's just a profoundly ecological concept, though that's not what it was framed for. But at the more macrocosmic level of our terrestrial ecologies, of course, they're just layers upon layers upon layers. I guess that's millions of layers of entanglement that make up any particular environment. And so to become mindful of that interdependence that makes each creature up is what ecology is all about, to remind us that we aren't independent beings, that we are not merely dependent beings, but we are interdependent beings, interdependent with anything that we're aware of, because if we're aware of it, we're already in relation to it. And that means we're already in some kind of interdependence with it. So I love the implicit ecology of that quantum notion of entanglement, and I hook it up with the apophatic or the negative theology, because what the entanglement points to is that we are relationally always involved in much, much, much more than we can keep anywhere close to conscious. We can only be conscious of a tiny fraction of our entanglements, of our relational webs, of the networks that make us up moment by moment, in which we are becoming and to which we contribute, even as they contribute back to us. But we can only know a minute fraction of the entanglement that we're caught up in. And to call it apophatic is not just to say there's so much we don't know. That would be a kind of agnostic entanglement. But it's a little more than that. By naming it apophatic, it's hooking it to the mystical tradition and acknowledging that there's something profoundly mysterious about every moment of every creature's existence in its entanglement with everything else that is. And that if we want to talk about the sacred or about the divine, we're talking about something that, again, vastly exceeds what we can claim to know, but that perhaps if it's manifesting itself, is manifesting itself through this radically entangled character of the universe. Maybe that's why values like justice and love, these profoundly relational, social values, become the very basis and cutting edge of our religious tradition. So that's a little episodic.
I would also say the relationships are.
Words about what exceeds language.
Yeah, but I was also going to say the power between those terms you mentioned, like relationality and love, is also what causes wars. I mean, it's so in and of itself, right? It is what's deeply religious, and it's that which deeply moves us into acts that can be negative in and of itself, but because of this desire of love or relationality or relationship, whether it's power dynamics or love of, it's a fascinating statement that you've made, because that term which we call love, or that term which we call relationality, is in all. And I would hope that we can take that on in like you mentioned, in a religious sense, but it also gets taken on in these other spaces as well.
And right, the most horrifying deformations that go forward in the name of love and justice. So,
Yes.
of course, and I love you becomes I want you and I get you. And that can be a whole species, whole peoples.
And I think that's where, like as you've mentioned from the beginning, I'm going to go full circle, the maintaining it within the inquisitiveness as opposed to the inquisition is important. And I think that everything we speak of is hopefully within that framework of thinking of inquisition. I mean, inquisitiveness or proposition in that sense. And I want to say that I see that resonance happening in meta-modernism when they're saying things are paradoxical because of that entanglement, and we are in the dark, and we have to not untangle, but see where those tangles are happening to know why, to be more informed. And therefore it's a process. It's one of where they realize interconnectedness. We are interconnected. Those entanglements are because we're interconnected, and are there for a reason, right? So that we're not independent, but as you mentioned, echoing your words, interdependent, entangled. We're in this mess together.
Yeah. So how does that entanglement, that complicated togetherness of us that bears upon truth, if that has to do with infidelity to the entanglements, but how does this entanglement turn into in for meta-modernism into a notion of oscillation? That's such an interesting concept. Picking up on from your from your website, oscillation. I think of it as a kind of rhythm that makes for endurance. How do you connect this meta-modern sense of oscillation to our conversation about entanglement?
That's a great question to explore. For me, the oscillation kind of pushes back against any type of staticness
Mhm.
and any type of domination of the term that we're trying to engage in, right? I think let's use love. I'm not going to allow you to fully take on that word. Love has its forms or reveals itself in ways, and we have to, at least honestly, in that truthfulness and that fidelity, to say there are these different forms of love. Love comes out in these many ways. And so I think that's where the oscillation comes in. I want to use the word a sobering, and moves us away from this romanticization of the word in and of itself, or maybe from its abstractness, and says, okay, no, come back.
Mm-hmm.
This is how it's used in context in the real world. And that needs to be taken into account to fully, or to more fully understand the complexity that we're dealing with in let's say in the term love, even in the term relationship and relationality.
The terms themselves oscillate, and almost I'm seeing that oscillation, but between love and its shadows.
Yes, I like that.
They become to distinguish because the oscillation is so vibratory and intense and pervasive.
And I think also, we never deal with the purity of the terms or some of these aspects in and of themselves because it's lived and it's realized
Mm.
or evaluated in a Whiteheadian piece. It doesn't come from its abstractness, but it's in that lived experiential place
Mm-hmm.
that we really understand what's happening, and it's the definition. So I think that oscillation is important because it allows us to move away to at least re-envision again, to come to grips with its outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
to think anew, right?
Yeah.
I kind of feel that it enforces sort of a thinking like in a matrix style, not in Matrix like the movie, but a matrix of this manyness.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to reckon with all of it.
With all of it, because we're tangled in it all, and it's tangled in us.
Correct. And so I see that value of oscillation there.
Mm-hmm.
It's moves away from my understanding to realize, oh, wow, there is this other understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Never thought of it from that perspective. And it keeps it engaged. It gets one out of one's own subjectiveness. It gets one involved in the process of life, or in the process of activity, or in the process of process.
And their oscillation perhaps connects to what we mean by vibration, or the pulsational rhythm. Whitehead often calls it vibration, that makes for what continuity there is in the world. There isn't like you, Raphael, are exactly the same essence from one moment to the next. Not in the process world. You are a pulsational current. You are, a
Yes.
vibratory, rhythmic unfolding, a pulsational becoming, but moment to moment becoming. And so there's a pulsation, an oscillation from one moment to the next that actually builds up the kind of continuities that we have for good and for ill. I mean, it makes for richness and complexity, and it makes for very tragic histories endlessly repeating themselves. But yeah, there's something about the rhythm, isn't there? The rhythmic character of existence itself that is in that
Yes.
population, and therefore the differentiation that it suggests, also differences that are very good and very wicked, somehow, are carried in that vibratory field. They repeat. And with Whitehead, once something takes place, it does in a sense endlessly repeat itself. Once something happens, like our conversation at this moment, it becomes what he calls objectively immortal. It will be an influence forever in the world, maybe in a very minor sense. And there are other conversations that have, unfortunately, much more massive influence, and others much more trivial influence. But this is the ontology, isn't it, of relationship, that in the repetitions, the oscillations that make up the vibratory continuity from past to present, from present to future, there is this repetition of the past, and yet it's repeated within the context of a new becoming. So some new possibility is actually in the oscillation with the past actuality. And the present is the scene of the tension, the creativity, the catastrophe.
Yeah.
But certainly the creative possibility is there for a new deployment of the history that's flowing into us.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, and I'm reminded of, I think Whitehead in Process and Reality says we never, and it could be him, or he could have been written there, but he brings back the Heraclitean term, you never step in the same river twice. And when I'm thinking about oscillation in the meta-modern sense, the imagery that comes up for me is how we understand from a cosmological sense, how galaxies are always in movement, and yet we're oscillating around these spaces for our survival.
Mm-hmm.
So this oscillation may have repetitive patterns, but at the same time, we are moving in somewhere. So we're literally never in the same place.
That's right.
And that novelty has to include that
Mm-hmm.
in some way, even though we may be repeating these patterns in the context that we're in, but it is different and it is novel.
It's repetition with a difference.
Yes.
I think that's a phrase of Deleuze, that to be a repetition of something is already to be different from the thing itself.
Yes.
Repetition is not the same as the original. And there can be, of course, great variation in that repetition. And we are, in some sense, when we're thinking about the crisis of democracy, we are repeating in our thoughts and our feelings big combinations of its past, the past that has been promising, the past that has been devastating, the distant past, the near past. It's all repeating in us, but with the difference of our perspective, your perspective, at this very moment, that there's something
Yes.
new there. And the more we tune to that newness, the more we are conscious of it, the more we can take responsibility for it. That is, responsibly, the more then we can recompose the elements of the past in a fresh way, not with the delusion that we can just get rid of the past.
Yes.
Then it'll get the better of us fast because we'll not be prepared for it. With the sense that we can take it, even with its horrors, its ugliness, we repeat those too as horror to show that they are horrors, so that they
Yes.
aren't repeated except in memory, but not in action. So always in this flux of truth, we are repeating endlessly from the past and to some degree composing afresh in the present. And the question is if we can help each other be able to respond, responsible to what is possible in this moment, arising out of the past, but orienting into the future. Because this moment now is already the past of this next moment and this next moment, right?
Yes.
Process thought gets us very moment to moment in our attention.
Wonderful.
Always
Well,
becoming we are.
Yes. Always becoming.
And always entangled.
Yes. Yes.
You'll never get rid of me now. I'll always be a part of you. And I've always got you now as a part of me, which you can't take away.
Powerful. That's powerful. Yes. Aaron, I know we're towards our end of our segment, and I just wanted to know if you wanted to add to anything or add anything else.
Appreciate you. As Dr. Keller was talking, this idea of truth in a meta-modern space or framework is interesting. And we've already hinted that it's very complicated because it looks so much different from what we're accustomed to. And so for me, in my creative mind, how we envisioned it as an analogy took us back to a memory when we were in the military. We were like this young New York kid, city kid, first time out of the city down south in Georgia for training and military. And so we befriended a local who was very much familiar with swampland. And he introduced me to alligator wrestling and all kind of things. But there was one event or activity that stuck with me the most. And that was catfishing. Because catfishing was different. The way they went about it, they go at night and they look for the darkest, deepest hole and they put their hand in it and hope that this catfish bites on and they pull it out, and that's how they caught their catfish. So this was an experience that I never forgot because sitting there, putting my hand in the water, and I'm like, I don't know what's going to bite me, And I remember feeling this feeling of, I don't know what's going to happen, but I might get a fish, And so for me, being in a meta-modern framework or space, approaching truth is similar for me, like putting my hand in a dark hole, hoping that some fish or catfish that symbolizes truth bites on and I can pull it out. And then that relationship can begin. I can learn maybe tips later on on how to do this better, but you really just don't perfect it. That's what we learned. But yeah, that was what we wanted to share. If you had any thoughts on that.
I've never been catfishing. I love the metaphor of this reaching into the dark waters. I mean, that could take us right back to Genesis 1, darkness on the face of the deep, the oceanic deep, the chaos out of which we become, the formless waters flux there. I think that's a good way to think about all creativity, not just the creation. It's emerging out of this flux of this darkness, but that's a lovely specific practice that you had there of reaching in quite nervously to the dark waters and seeing what comes out and what might even prove to be nourishing. But I love the way Meta-Modernism, as I'm beginning to understand it, really wants to stay faithful to the mystery of that unknowability, that darkness with its precarities, its dangerous qualities. Yes, we might get bitten. It might be worse than that. I just saw Moby Dick at the Met, and yes, right, the fish might devour you, and all of your shipmates too. So yes, the mystery of the deep waters is there to explore with care and with awareness. It can be very risky, and perhaps it gets all the more dangerous the more we think we can control it and just expose all of it to the bright light of our terribly modern rationality, which then some of us question with terribly modern, or is that postmodern skepticism. So I'm really appreciative of this meta-modern sense that, yes, we want to embrace what truth we can, that offers itself to us, that responds to our inquiry, and yet recognize that we can't own it, we can't claim it, we can't keep it, we can't hold it long in that embrace, that it if it's truth, it's always much, much more, in part, just not because it's transcendent and big, like the traditional deity, but because it's entangled with everything that is, which is infinitely more than we can take in. And yet we have to make our very particular choices with respect to our very particular realities, with faithfulness to our particular environments, to our communities, to our terrestrial realities. So to live this complex relationality does expose us to getting bitten by those catfish. But then we share those stories, we learn something from each other. We can take some precautions without becoming paralyzed and paranoid. We can keep taking risks and know that we take wiser risks when we are learning from each other and perhaps taking them together, facing our shared dangers with an honesty that we can afford because we can talk about it with each other, so we can express our fears and our griefs, but we can also indulge in some enjoyment of each other and of life, no matter what. So I love the vibrations of the work that you two are doing, that Meta-Modernism.
Yeah, just really briefly, we've been engaging with just certain actors within Meta-Modernist framework, and it's been truly a learning experience where we've focused on race and identity and gender, and finalizing in this question on truth as sort of like this first phase of thinking through meta-modernity, some of the values in it. It instills what it's trying to seek and how we can think it through in these specific areas, in particular race, but also in identity formation. What is it trying to get out of modernity? What is it trying to get out of postmodernity? And it's just been fascinating discussion with just key thinkers in the meta-modern framework, just because it's so new that there hasn't been enough discussion on it. Maybe on in an academic space, it's still growing. I think there's one particular text in Chicago from the Chicago School, but then it's just now getting a journal to start talking about it.
Right?
And there's some others. So it's just been a fascinating journey to see some of the parallels that we find in process thinking and what it's trying to do to reconcile both modernity and postmodernity. So
Beautiful.
it's fascinating. So we just want to thank you, Catherine, for taking out this time, to going through some of the troubles we've had with sound or anything like that in the beginning. But we really wanted to thank you for spending time with us. And it's been rich. It's been truly rich in this time together. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Raphael and Aaron. I loved the conversations, really brilliant questions, and I hope we stay in communication.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.